Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for American Toxin Foundation webinar. Um, Today, we will be discussing the theme of bridging the digital divide, tackling structural inequalities in access, participation, and opportunity. I would love for us to take this towards AI, how we are seeing the use and access of AI by people in low and middle income countries, and what we can do about its future. Today, for the panel, we have Mr. Faisal Lalani, who is a global community organizer with a background in building international coalitions, advising governments, and preserving human rights and democracy. Faisal has worked all over the world, including in Nepal, South Africa, India, the UK, Sri Lanka, and the US. And he has expertise in digital rights, education reform, public health, climate and energy transitions, and foreign policy. Faisal is currently the head of global partnerships at the Collective Intelligence Project and the executive editor at We Are One Humanity. We also have Kate with us. Kate is an economist at the World Bank South Asia Region Gender Innovation Lab. She has previously served as Associate Director for the Deaf Lab at Duke and Research Scientist in the Department of Economics at Duke University. She has completed her PhD in economics at University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. She has worked on research and policy outreach on aid, trade, and development at the Center for Global Development and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She has also served as a visiting faculty member at the Lahore School of Economics and at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. She is a fellow at the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan and the Consortium of Development Policy Research in Pakistan. Last but not the least, we have Dr. Hussain Nadeem with us, who is a founder of Third AI, a Silicon Valley-based AI company that works at the intersection of policy, democracy, and national security. Dr. Nadeem was previously Morris R. Greenberg World Fellow at the Yale University, AI 2030 Fellow, and Fellow at Transformation of the Humans in Berkeley, California. He has also spent over a decade in policy sector working in senior leadership roles in national security, data, and tech domain. He was part of the Prime Minister Special Committee on Emerging Technologies and Digital Transformation, and Chief Minister's Committee on Web 3.0 integration in Pakistan. His work in policy has helped him receive several accolades, including Forbes 30 Under 30, British Council Social Impact Award, and numerous others. Um, Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We are really honored to have all of you with us, and hope to have a very fruitful discussion. Just to start off, I would love to hear everyone's thoughts and insights on the digital divide, the sort of world we are living in. I was recently reading how low-income countries have participation of 27% of people in their have access to internet in those countries, and how big of a divide is it when compared to high-income countries where the access is almost 80 to 90%. This, coupled with AI, has had the conversation going about the increase in inequality, whether we will be reversing harms, reversing all the progress that we have made towards bridging the digital divide. So I would just love for everyone to share some initial thoughts on where you see this going and how do you see the divide just increasing in the future. Faisal, would you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks for the excellent introduction. Um, so I got my start in this field called ICT for D, basically, tech for international development. I spent a lot of time living in a lot of different countries, working on different projects like tech in rural villages in Nepal or community wireless networks in South Africa. And that was kind of my whole start in understanding the impact of technology on society, specifically the impact of tech on low to middle income countries. And a lot of it has informed how I think about everything going on today, especially with AI. A lot of the digital divide there was much more straightforward in understanding, problems of access, problems of transparency, and now you have AI, which is becoming increasingly global. A lot of countries are trying to build sovereign models. And the questions are rooted in the same challenges, but they are also much more nuanced in terms of how pluralistic are AI models? How inclusive are development practices? How exploitive are they? Are the same colonial dynamics taking over? Are they just enhanced? And so a lot of the work that I focus on now, one is trying to truly build democratic AI, build AI that actually is inclusive of cultures, not just in language, but in a lot of other nuances, which I can get into later. It's in making sure that public input from countries all over the world is channeled into places of power, not only AI labs, but also governments and global institutions, and also making sure that a lot of countries in the global south are at the table when these decisions are being made. So, I'm right now in Sri Lanka, and there's a big conference on tech accountability that's happening this week, and the whole idea is just that no one in majority world countries speaks to one another. They have to go through an intergovernmental proxy. So how do you actually bridge that gap so that these countries aren't just falling into this narrative of, oh, how do we catch up? But instead, no, how do we create new paths that are encompassing our own cultures, our own trajectories? Yeah.
Aside or Kate, would you guys have any idea or remarks on this?
Would you like to go ahead? I think we both unmuted at the same time.
Yeah, I was noticing that. You go ahead, I guess. I would love to listen from you.
Sure, thanks. So I'll just say a couple of things about I think that the event was framed around the digital divide kind of broadly, and our team has done a lot of work on the gender aspect of that divide. So I don't think I can paste in a link to everybody who's participating in the webinar, but maybe we can circulate it afterwards. We've issued in December a report which is entitled Women's Economic Empowerment in Pakistan, an Evidence-Guided Toolkit for More Inclusive Policies. And this is a diagnostic kind of looking at a range of we pulled together microdata from many different sources and did an analysis of kind of what is the most up-to-date and detailed kind of decomposition we can do to understand what is the extent of women's economic empowerment and the key constraints. This is led by my colleague Sophia Amaral, also at the Gender Innovation Lab. And one of the things that the report highlights is there is a pretty dramatic gender gap in the population in Pakistan in terms of access to digital technology. So using data from the multiple indicator cluster surveys from all 4 provinces, the most recent one from each, what they show is that while 22% of men in Pakistan say that they've used the internet at least once, that number is only 8% for women, so just over a third as many. 20% of men say they've used a computer at least once, and only 9% of women have. And even among those people who have used a computer, the men have had kind of a broader range of tasks. So these surveys ask the respondent about, have you done things like sending emails, creating a presentation, copying or transferring files, just different really basic digital skill sets. And what we see is that men, even among the people who use computers, men are doing a kind of a broader range of those kinds of activities. And this sort of resonates with some of the less quantitative but more anecdotal or informal evidence that I have from recent pilot activities that we've done on some of our research projects, where even participants who are highly educated and have access to technology we're seeing a similar pattern in terms of exposure to AI. So we recently carried out a pilot exercise where we were asking both male and female participants to carry out data entry tests, and we wanted to see whether or not they would use AI to help them with that task. And that was sort of not a primary goal of the exercise, but it was a sort of a side thing we wanted to check. And what the team observed was that the men were actually men were more seem to be more likely in the small pilots they've run so far to use AI to help them do these tasks do these kinds of data entry tasks efficiently. And and the women only ended up using AI if they asked a male in their household for help, who then suggested, hey, why don't you try plugging this whole question into ChatGPT and see what it can do. So there's a huge digital divide, and it kind of persists. There's not just a digital divide in terms of access, but it's sort of persistent across even those who are accessing and kind of using technology we see a divide even conditional on that. So a couple of things that we're doing in this space, you were asking kind of what are we doing? We have a big work program on jobs platforms. So looking at labor markets and how we can increase employment and increase women's access to employment. This is an area that I've been working on with many fantastic colleagues here in Pakistan and internationally for about 10 years now. So we have a big work program trying to understand urban labor markets and how jobs platforms can help people access them. And by jobs platforms, I'm including things like those who've looked for a job in Pakistan, probably familiar with a platform like Rosie, or LinkedIn. Globally, you might have used LinkedIn. We have been operating a more low-tech platform called Job Talash for the purpose of doing research and experiments to understand kind of how people can use these platforms. And we're getting ready to issue in the next couple of months a report on best practices from across lower and middle income countries on how these kinds of platforms can be made more inclusive of women. And in that, we do kind of get into this issue of AI, which has a lot of potential for helping to match together jobs and job seekers more efficiently, like find the right person for the right job, which is a really high potential possibility, because in the absence of these sorts of platforms, the default way that most people search for jobs in low-income settings, and certainly in Pakistan, is through their social networks, and those overwhelmingly benefit men. So what we're trying to understand how we can make the platforms kind of work better is in itself a gendered issue, but introducing AI-based algorithms for matching can also potentially reinforce existing gender sort of dynamics as well, right? So depending on how you train the algorithms, you may end up reinforcing some of the same sorts of issues that come up with the human graders or human judges whose data are used to train them. We're keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in this issue of jobs platforms, keep an eye out for that report, which is coming out in a couple of months. And then in kind of looking forward, we're working, as we're a research and evaluation and evidence lab kind of embedded into the World Bank. A big part of what we do is to work on projects that are bank funded and government implemented. And so we're collaborating with a big new initiative that the government of Pakistan is undertaking with World Bank support called DEEP, the Digital Economy Enhancement Program. And in that, a part of what that project is doing is sort of helping support the digitization and integration of public services of various different kinds across the country. A part of that will include efforts to try to make these sorts of services more accessible to women and help women develop kind of the skills and access to use them and to engage with them. And one key thing, which is one last key thing I want to mention sort of before wrapping up on this, is a huge part of the gap that women face in terms of accessing digital technology is really not about income or wealth to afford a device. It's about permission from male family members who don't want them to communicate with people outside the family without supervision, to put it bluntly. So a key part of what we're hoping to do in the collaboration with that DEEP project is to kind of get into this and understand if we can do anything to help increase the buy-in from male family members with the idea that it can be beneficial for women to be able to use and access technology and to try to overcome that permission gap. That's something that has been documented in other settings in South Asia, that we still are trying to grapple with and develop an evidence base about what actually works to help to close that permission gap. So that's a key priority for us in the coming years as well. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Aina. Pleasure listening to Kate and Faisal both. I actually have like millions of questions right now going in my mind. So hopefully I'll also get the chance to ask questions specifically on this D program. I spent about a decade and a half in the Pakistan government, both at the Ministry of Planning and Development and in the national security side with the Prime Minister. Would love to know more about the programs that you're doing because I was part of the digital transformation team within the government. So I have very interesting insights on that as well. But I guess both of you have covered very interestingly the digital divide part from the specific viewpoints on how it's impacting communities, women, gender, and all of those issues. I'm going to try to take a different hat on this because I work in technology, I work in AI. So the way I look at things is slightly more different now than I did at least half a decade back. The divide to me is essentially it's kind of like layered divide. So there's no one divide there. There's a layered divide, and I kind of think we break down into three different layers. One is the people with the humans with no access against humans with some access. And that's a very, very small nuance I want to bring. Humans with some access. And then the second layer is the humans with some access compared to humans with full access. And then there is a third layer, which to me, where I work, is becoming more and more visible now. And that's the more scarier part of the digital divide is humans with access as a whole against the digital native AIs, the AI agents, for instance. So in this whole equation of divide, I want to bring in the element of the agents as well, because the divide is no more going to be between the gender level or the level of the region or the geography. The divide that we're witnessing right now, and I operate out of Silicon Valley, is really how companies are now firing in thousands software engineers from Stanford, MITs, and all of that. So these are the people, the which we're classifying in traditional categories as humans with full access, and yet they're the ones that are also getting to be hit by this digital divide. I don't think the digital divide is probably the accurate term. We need a new category for that because there is another entrant in this domain, which is the AI agents. And we as a company build AI agents. And the reliance we had on humans, let's say 2 years back or 5 years back, about the stuff that a team of 70 to 100 people would be doing can be done entirely in much better way, much quicker way by the AI agents. So it's not just, the interhuman, the human versus the human with some access, no access, or access. That part is still there, and that part is going to be huge. But I do also think that there is another element which I'm trying to bring, which is the AI agents part, which is going to render this debate in a very different way. So the divide is going to become even more bigger, much more comprehensive, and I think that's definitely one part I would love to have more conversation on as we go forward. So that's, I guess, my 3 minutes on how I'm looking at the digital divide between the humans, but also the AI agents, which is creating a new kind of divisions. And later in the conversation, I think I'll discuss more on that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I've been thinking, like, once you talk about, humanity versus the AI, and just like who is creating those AIs in the first place? Like, we had people who are like coming from MIT, Stanford, who are making the technology. And there was already a debate about how technology is made by people from high income countries. And it was so hard to integrate people from, global south into making of those platforms and the internet. And now once we have started integrating their voices and worked on the access to internet, now we're seeing another debate, which is like, if you are making AIs and those AIs are going to be running the world in the future, what is the sort of databases they're being trained on? Who is training them? And are we running into the issue of making it more Western centric, or maybe more male centric, with like female voices, especially from low and middle income countries, being siloed out of it? So what do you guys think? Like, where is that headed, and what we can do to even bridge that gap in the first place, if it is bridgeable?
I could go on that because I think I'll catch up from exactly where I left on this. So it's a very interesting thing, and I'm glad you pointed it out because I think this is the natural progression of the conversation. So having access does not translate into capabilities. you could have extraordinary access. But it's what you really do and whether you are able to do it or not, which comes down to your other point, which is related to who really owns the AI. I mean, if the AI is entirely being built by a handful of Stanford, Berkeley graduates out of Silicon Valley, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just that the data sets being used, if I'm not wrong, about 58% of the entire data sets that are being used to train the large language models are in the English language, which is only about 13% of the world speaking population, right? So that inherent cognitive bias comes in. And if you're stacking up AI on cognitive bias, which is coming from the specific university, the specific region of the US, then the specific culture and the specific continent, it's a layers and layers of bias that can be fed into it. Now, the problem is, so it's who's owning it, who's building it, who's curating it, and how it is all being shaped out, which comes to my bigger problem, which is related to culture. And I think there is a very little conversation on this, and I don't know why, because I tend to believe that culture is the building block of any economy, social change, etc., etc. Now, the question, and I'm going to pose it as a question, that once you have the AIs and this whole division on who's building and curating it, what happens to the culture? To me, the cultural part becomes very much eroded. So let's say somebody sitting in Mandi Bahauddin in Pakistan or Adi Babas in Africa, when they become participants of the AI or the digital world, they're letting go parts of their culture when they become part of I mean, not just part of the language, but part of the UX and the UI as well. So it's how the cultural sense you're building technology. And I say this because we build technologies, and when we build and deploy technologies for the market in the US compared to the market in the post-colonial states, it's completely different. And I think Faisal mentioned something related to the colonization part, which is absolutely on point. Will the AI liberate the humans, or it will continue to create more trappings for enslavement? So the existing democracies might use it to become more of democracy, while the countries where they're lacking of democracy, they become more and more authoritarianism. So in that sense, I guess the point, and I want to finish my conversation on that, is related to, from the start point of the building blocks to the end point of how the people are using and consuming it. So, despite the fact, and I work very deeply in the political space in Pakistan, so despite the fact that a lot of rural areas in Punjab have technology, access to internet, and everybody has a phone, but there are also very dark sides to how they're using it, right? So the level of pornography, the unrestrained pornography within children under 12 years age within the rural area in Pakistan is at epidemic level. And when you look at those data coming in, then you start looking at the nuances that, access smart, good, the capability, are they using it to build apps, or are they using it for pornography? Then you start looking at it, and then the things change. So the point really is access doesn't translate into capability, and the capability part then is a very large subject on who's building and curating that. And I think that's something that I would love to explore more in this conversation.
Yeah, wait, that was really good. Faisal, I know you work a lot with collective intelligence project on this. So what are your insights and where do you see this headed?
Yeah, this is great. So I guess what I'll do is I'll quickly kind of elaborate a little bit on the problem that Hussain just talked about, and then tell you about a couple solutions that we work on to bridge this culture gap, this digital divide. So a lot of what I've been focused on for the past 2 years is, I mentioned democratic AI, but also this idea of sovereignty when it comes to AI. I talk a lot about how AI has basically become a proxy for geopolitical power, and Lucia Belli and Pablo Chavez, they've been writing a lot about kind of what enables a country to build their own AI. Is it even possible for many countries to do it, or is it a fruitless race? A lot of companies recently, OpenAI, NVIDIA, they have these initiatives about, democratic AI, like let's bring AI to the rest of the world, but on the US stack, which I think is quite hilarious and very ironic. So, all of this is kind of going on right now, these kind of soft power pushes through AI, which, again, to reiterate Hussein's point, it's kind of so deeply embedded within the AI stack to be colonial, to be extractive, to elicit a digital divide, that I almost wonder, and I'm going to pose this as a question too, is the way that AI is being currently built inherently undemocratic? uh, there's this amazing economist at Harvard. He recently, he posed this concept of the alignment of purpose. The way that AI is being made right now is aligned very much with autocracies. Democracy requires transparency. AI is very much opaque. AI is extractive. AI requires a lot of data. Dictators excel at that, et cetera, et cetera. And so basically, the way that things are being built now are more aligned with widening this digital divide. So I phrase it all like this because what we do at CIP is try to figure out other ways to build AI, offer an alternative future. So first, I'll start with culture, right? Hussain brought this up just now. A lot of what we focus on is going to a lot of different countries, Sri Lanka, India, Brazil, Nigeria, wherever, working with civil society and local experts on the ground to actually evaluate how models take in prompts that people of that country usually ask. So, for instance, where they might get local medication, how AI relates to a certain music. Human AI relationships are a huge thing, and I actually was thinking about this when Kate was speaking about, the gender-based relationships with AI. I'm so curious about that. But we take all of that in. We look at a lot of different models, sovereign and more global ones, and we go right back to local experts and say, how like relatable is this? How resonant is this with your culture? We get thousands and thousands of input, and we're actually able to create a benchmark out of cultural resonance, out of this kind of pluralistic validation. And AI labs are willing to listen to this because they want to thrive in these countries, but they're so bad at it. And it's not just in development, it's also in governance. This I also want to get into a lot more. I mean, we talk a lot about global governance, we talk a lot about how do we make sure that everyone's working together, but it's also very imbalanced. I worry we're creating another digital divide because a lot of governance is catered towards the West, right? There's a lot of talk about the Brussels effect, the Washington effect. I think there's a Delhi effect now too. This idea that like these concentrated capitals of power are the ones controlling how regulation is built around their own contexts rather than what's actually happening on the ground in a lot of these places. So there's a lot CIP is doing with cultural evals, with bridging the governance gap. Last thing I'll quickly say is that we also have this amazing initiative called the Global Dialogues, in which basically we directly talk to thousands and thousands of people all over the world based on demographic, based on culture, and we get their input on everything related to different facets of AI, from labor displacement, human AI relationships, peace building. And we are able to actually convert and translate a lot of what people are saying into tangible changes in, again, model development and model governance. So all this goes to say is that our theory of change is we need to offer a new way of building AI if we want it to be truly democratic and truly inclusive and bridge that digital divide. Because the way that it's being built right now, it feels like it's always going to default back to the way things have been done.
Yeah, I think that also makes me think just generally, even when we try to be democratic and include populations from lower and middle income countries, we're also running into the problem that Kate mentioned about how it's likely to be men. It's likely to be the people who already have power to be the voices from developing countries in the first place. And Kate, over here, I would love to hear more about how do you see like women or even like people who are not like running the show in Pakistan and how they're using, because I'm also wondering if it's going to be industrialists using AI to phase out labor and create more unemployment. Where do you see that going in Pakistan?
So I actually just posted a link, and maybe I know that I don't think the attendees can see all the links, but I've been posting links to the things I've been talking about as we go. This is not a Sargil product. And this is not from our team, but it's from another team within the World Bank. So this is a working paper actually very recently released by Gabriel Demambines and co-authors at the bank that try to actually use, so I'm a labor economist, right? So this is the sort of a thing that would appeal to me, to try to understand, okay, based on the sort of work that people are doing in different economies, what is their exposure to, what is their sort of exposure to being replaced, their jobs being replaced by AI. And what they are actually documenting is that which is, I think, very much resonating with what Hussain was saying earlier, that the exposure is quite a bit higher in high income countries. And if you think about that a bit more, it makes sense, right? Because there are some things that are there are some things that you can imagine, like it's gonna be quite a while before the AI is giving me a haircut or putting a new roof on my house. And if you think about the composition of, oh, thank you so much for posting that. I guess I didn't see where to, I said the chat is where I need to put it. I don't know if I have the ability to post there, but thank you for posting that. The AI is not going to be doing those sorts of tasks for me, but it might be able to replace my accountant, right? So this sort of white collar and document based activities can, they're much more in the foreseeable future to be replaced, and those are in higher proportions in high income countries. And this kind of analysis is something that we could replicate, breaking things down a little bit further using data from labor force surveys to understand how much of this is, how does this kind of, what's the distributional implication across gender and across different sort of parts of the population as well. And I think that that's a very useful exercise. One thing that we can't tell from doing that aspect of the exercise is exactly where are jobs going to grow. So, if you look back less than 100 years, one of the most common jobs, like white collar jobs for women, was to be in the typing pool, right? So, you guys are all much too young to remember. Maybe you've seen this in the movies or something, where if somebody had a meeting and they needed to distribute minutes of the meeting, it would need to get typed up on multiple typewriters, right? And sent around to all of the offices, so that for every copy, you would need a stenographer typing it up. And so you would have these big rooms full of people sitting at typewriters, typing things up. And that job obviously doesn't exist anymore. Technology made it obsolete. And the currently technology is making a lot of other jobs obsolete, but the technology that made the typing pool obsolete also created a lot of other jobs that at that time nobody could imagine, right? So what is there that is out there that some of the things we are imagining already and thinking about actively, like what are the kinds of what sort of growth in employment and for whom can we envision being enabled by AI? But there's probably a lot of it that we can't quite envision yet either. And so sort of thinking more about that and how can we position people better, and especially groups that lack a lot of access, how can we position them better to take advantage of it? I think that's one of the key questions we have to grapple with. But as some of those stats that I mentioned at the beginning really highlight, is that in a context like Pakistan and a lot of low income contexts, the gap, I think, Hussain, you talked about it as a gap between people who have like no access to a little bit of access. Or and so, when you have only 8% of women having ever used the internet at all, that's a pretty huge leap to thinking ahead to what sorts of opportunities could be sort of generated by that. So, I mean, just as a bit of a side comment there, one job that has been generated, and I don't know if you guys have probably, if you're not familiar with it, you might not be familiar with this very nice project that came out of Stanford a couple of years back, looking at enabling women to work from home in India. I'll post that link in a second as well. Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, the work that they were, so that in that project, what they did is they gave women who were not working in sort of typical Indian household the opportunity to work from home. And what is it that they were actually doing? Well, they were working on smartphones, doing image tagging, I think. And that is the sort of thing that's used to feed into these kinds of algorithms. So that's sort of an example of that's a very, very low level kind of basic type of a job that's generated by this shift in technology. Ideally, what we would like to understand is where are they, but understand more holistically, like what else is going to be enabled by this, and how can we equip people with the skills to take advantage of it. We'll stop there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think as we move towards the second half of our panel talk today, I would love to hear your guys' perception of how international organizations are perceiving it, what roles are NGOs and CSOs playing in it, and also just local governments. Are they doing anything, especially Pakistan's government, are they doing anything to promote this? Or also just talking about tech CEOs, we hear a lot of talk about their philanthropic efforts. How true do you guys see it as? I know Faisal has already talked about this, but Jenny, do we see any hope there? Or what can a common person do in its growth to make it less divisive? Hussain, would you want to start? Just because you're first on my screen here.
Sure. So I guess in the past couple of years, since the large language models come in, there is a promise of AI, and then there is the actualization of AI on ground. And the promise and the hype around AI doesn't necessarily has translated that deep in many verticals that we operate in. For instance, the initial hype with AI when it started coming in, and we work in AI pre-LLMs, by the way, so that with the large NLPs and all of that. So it was different then, but because of the large language models and the hype around it, everyone wanted to, figure out a way to integrate AI. But I think now that hype is slightly becoming more and more mature. So there is a new recognition that is coming in, which I mentioned about the promise of AI and the actualization of AI, that the current text-based models do not really fit well into the existing workflows of the users. For instance, in the national security domain and the diplomatic levels, and people will need to make decisions. There are many concerns about the accuracy part, the trusted safety part, the stochastic parroting and all of that. So there are elements of that. Again, none of which that are not fixable. But the real part is the when you look at the government machine or the policy machine, it's built on very, very traditional legacy stacks. Now, those legacy stacks don't really speak with the whole new AI stack, which is completely different. Now, which is why you have companies like Palantirs coming in, barraging themselves in, and trying to take over every single thing because they want to render obsolete every other element of the technology, which creates what Faisal also talked about, and I think Kate also insinuated, is related to tech-based tyranny, which can create its own host of problems. Now you're looking more like a Chinese style of tech integrations, and there is also a recognition within the US, I would say the US policy community, that building AI part is one thing. So Americans are very good at building and coming up with new innovations, but AI doesn't really stay in the lab, right? The real winner of AI is not the one who's building AI, but the ones that are deploying it at speed. Now, the deployability part is a complete new dynamic. And because the Chinese have, the whole infrastructures, the centralized government systems, the centralized data, for them to deploy any new technology or AI, for instance, was going to take them 24 hours compared to the US, which is going to take them about 50 years, if ever, by the way. So these kind of the whole new host of problems that come in is I guess the technology pressure is so deep now. And because the Silicon Valley meets Washington, D.C. under the last elections, it is creating such a fracturing moment where there is a recognition that there has to be some level of change in the existing way of work. Now, what that kind of change is going to be is what the fight is about. We recently saw in the political space here in the US, and we're seeing it all over the world now as well, that what kind of a new reality is going to emerge out of it. So kind of like going with the whole this notion that we do know that what exists right now is not going to work. That I think there is a clear recognition to everyone in the policy community that we talk about. This is not going to work. But what is going to be the new thing? How are we going to imagine the new stuff? There is a disconnect in that. So, which is why I say that we're at that brief moment where the promise of AI and the actualization of AI, there is a gap in that. Now, this gap, this fracturing point is where all the politics is happening, all the wars are happening, and all of that. So I guess I'm not sure if I answered your question to the point, but I do think that there is a very big difference in how the AI is being perceived within the systems, how they're being utilized, at what levels they're being utilized. Because we've worked across from a very base level all the way up to the CEO, to the prime minister, to the president level. So we work across the vertical, and we know that things operate very differently at different stages of the hierarchies. And one, I guess I'm going to make this one last point. So the velocity of change, if you look at 100 years and all the way back to 5,000 years, the velocity of change was very slow in some ways. That the industrialization came in, seeped in, took hundreds of years for the rest of the world. Some places haven't even industrialized so far, and so did with the all the other technologies. What is different with AI? With AI is that it's a conceptual technology. It changes. It has some philosophical stakes involved, right? Where it's not just improving things. It's significantly creating a new language, new discourse, new way of doing things. Now, in that sense, there is a lot of discomfort within the people that I talk to in the policy community, because they do know this fact that the state as we know it and the human as we know it is going to fundamentally and conceptually change, and nobody's really ready for it. While it's there, I mean, the AI is here, but we're not really ready for that, because we haven't really come up with what I guess Faisal was also talking about, the new vision of what is going to be. And I think this is where the whole division, the whole opportunities, the whole of everything is going to be at this very small point.
I think it's also so concerning that it is being made in the US and now in China as well. And the governance conversations are happening in DC solely while it impacts the whole world. How, like Kate and Faisal, how do you see like international community taking part in it? Kate, like if you want to talk about World Bank, the UN, and Faisal, like I would love to hear about NGOs and CSOs. How do we make it non-DC centric then?
Yeah, so why don't you start? I think this is more your area of expertise.
Sure, but I would also love to hear your perspective on this. I once, when I was in India, I used to work for this group, the Technology for Emerging Markets, and the founder of it, Kentaro Toyama, he always used to talk about this, the law of amplification, where he talked about how all tech is an extension of public institutions that exist in a society. And so tech can amplify good, so it becomes great, but it can also amplify bad, so it becomes worse. And I used to challenge him a lot on this, but then I, worked a lot in the field, and of course, I realized that he was completely right in a lot of ways. And this story about one of my professors, he was working, I think it was in Pakistan actually, where they were trying to figure out ways to stop people from breaking into ATMs. So they introduced security cameras in the ATMs, but then the robbers would just throw rocks at the cameras and break into it anyway. The lesson being that like people will do what they want, and tech will, either be an enhancer or just they'll find a way around it. The reason that I share all this is because it informs my own perspective on changing public institutions in order to uh, bridge digital divides and make AI more pluralistic. That's why I focus on CSOs and NGOs a lot. I think civil society is so deeply culturally embedded in their communities. They're very technically capable. They're very resourceful, and they're very passionate about this. Most importantly, so I spent a lot of time over the past 7 or 8 years working with civil society in a lot of different countries. And the best example that I can give, Aina, to answer your question is, I'm in Sri Lanka right now. So I was here again 2 years ago, and they were passing their own self-regulatory mechanism for online safety, because the government wouldn't pass it. A lot of countries were still figuring out, what does this mean? How do you get tech companies to stop it? And, Sri Lanka is a small country, right? And not many people in the tech space are like focusing on it too much. So they said, let's just create our own. New Zealand did, Singapore, UK is kind of thinking about it. So they created the online safety bill. And the way they did it was that they recruited almost every civil society organization in the country, from every demographic, every culture, gender, religion, everything. They brought them all together and they each had input into this self-regulatory code. Then they used the Asia Internet Coalition, which is composed of Apple, Spotify, Google, all these companies. They actually came to the table, and they were able to negotiate this. Now, things did fall apart a bit because of miscommunication on part of the tech companies, I will say, because they had a very colonial perspective on this whole thing. And they were like, oh, should Sri Lanka be focused on online safety? Which is like, what? So it kind of fell apart. But my point is that the process was replicated in a lot of other areas and a lot of other regions in the APAC region here. And that to me demonstrates the best way to utilize local expertise and to actually change things and how not only, again, how AI is developed, but how AI is governed, which I think is extremely important. So civil society is willing, they're capable, and they're resourceful. And so I think utilizing them, bringing them to the table is the best thing for people living in the West, people, international governments to help support, not necessarily to like a control, but to facilitate, just get them there and then they'll do all the hard work because they know their countries, they're ready to do this. They just need to be at the table and need the attention.
Yeah, that's great. Kate, would you have any last thoughts before we go into Q&As?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to the question. One thing I will tell you that may be relevant is that the bank is, apart from this whole, so certainly people at the bank are worrying about this a lot and thinking about it a lot. And separately, the bank is also massively decentralizing, which has caused a lot of confusion. Right now, 80% of our staff, if I understand the stats correctly, are based in DC and 20% everywhere else in the world. And over the next 5 to 10 years, I think the management's hoping to flip that to 2080. So that presents a lot of logistical issues, but I'm hopeful. I mean, I actually spend part of the year in Pakistan just mostly on my own initiative, but because I want to, and I think it helps a lot. And I'm hopeful that having more people based in country as opposed to in DC will have a lot of positive benefits for, although it's still, a pretty big distance from the bank office in Islamabad to the rest of the country, literally and figuratively. But hopefully that can go some of the way towards bridging some of that gap, which has been a concern for a lot of observers at the bank for many, many years. I don't have much to say about the governance specific. I think Hussain and Hussain and Faisal have spoken to that much more compellingly. I think Faisal's got
Yeah, Faisal.
No, that's a really excellent point, Kate. And I just wanted to quickly add, the Paris AI Summit happened a few months ago, and you kind of saw, there's a question in the QA I saw about this too, about like, oh, it's US versus China. But, and I read about this a lot, how like the US kind of pushes their own democratic AI version in competition with China's more autocratic version. And what I've noticed over the years is how it's kind of becoming more and more of the same. Like the US withdrew support for cross-border data flows, international data sharing a couple years ago. We don't have a federal data privacy law. Like things are becoming more and more alike. And so it's no more of a ricochet. It's more like whatever is the most optimal version of AI, whatever gets us power wins. So the reason I bring this up is because what you saw in the Paris AI Summit is that a lot of majority world countries were saying, wait a minute, why don't we just offer our own version of this, right? They're starting to speak up. A lot of the countries that I'm working with here that are visiting for this conference are telling us like, with all the stuff happening in the US right now, this is our time to like, change this focus of power. Like, let's come up with our own models of governance, our own models of development. Let's address our own internal digital divides. And so there is an opportunity for a lot of countries to be involved here where the US is falling short. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Kate and Faisal. We'll have like a brief Q&A session, and everyone in the audience is very welcome to send their Q&As through the chat. We already have one, which is that post DeepSeek, do we see that culture is really West biased, or are we seeing that China is becoming an important part of it. What do you guys think that it's headed?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't get the earlier part of the question.
Yeah, it's at post DeepSeek. Is the culture still very West biased, given that China is becoming an important part in it, or are we seeing it becoming more China biased? I think we can just discuss like it's again like another power competition that's going to happen, but is it still like a positive thing that it's in opposition to the West?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer it in as best possible way I can. I do think when we talk about emerging technology, specifically AI and all, there is a tendency to use the traditional categories of what we know and force fit certain developments and the impact in the hard built categories, because I do feel that we as humans try to make sense of everything in categories by labeling it, and that's what we do with the machine learning as well. We try to label and all of that. But when you come across conceptual technologies like AI, those traditional categories don't exist in the same way anymore. So you need to come up with a new fluid ways to describe, ways to develop new categories and all of that. So I don't think it. I mean, it is geopolitics for sure. AI being there is a contestation of power, but I also don't think it is much about that either. On the surface it may look like that, but there are other elements to it that exist where there are tons of things where US and China are fighting, have been fighting, or appear to be fighting, and there are like millions of other places where they're closely collaborating as well on space tech, let's say on quantum, for instance. There is also that element which doesn't really come on the surface, but if you start digging a bit deeper, you'll start seeing whole of the collaborations as well. The competition is good because it makes the news. The collaborations, no, not so much. So I do think that I would not risk to look at AI specifically from the US China competition, because to me that's a very reductionist way to explain what's really going on. AI's drive, AI, the way it's going to work out, the commoditization of the intelligence is going to create a whole new architecture of how we think, how we believe, how we build, how we do stuff. And that is not going to be related to China only or the US only. It's going to create new power structures and new power balances. Even right now, if you look at in the US right now, the AI debate isn't really, there is no American owned AI. It doesn't exist. It's Elon Musk X AI. It is Open AI, which is backed by certain venture funds. And now, I mean, I guess I want to make this point a little bit more, probably not the best forum to do that, but I'll still do it. It really comes down to the new politics, right? So you have, and it's the numbers game as well. So you have few people who have crossed the $1 trillion thresholds. Now, some of these people are bigger than most of the countries in the US. The size of their revenues are bigger than the GDPs of some of the most, I mean, dozens of post-colonial states. The traditional categories of nation states, the regions, the development doesn't work anymore, because nobody was supposed to, the nation states were not built for certain individuals to become so wealthy. Now, but that since exists now, and the boundaries, the spatial boundaries that used to define us, which was this earth, is now being penetrated through by landing in Mars and the rovers and all of that. So we need to start understanding how the Silicon Valley, maybe billionaires and the trillionaires, and how the governments are looking at this thing where, the conversation is not really the AI between China and the US. It's really about the new dimensions of power, the new dimensions of money that has been created. And one small point on that, which is the scarier part to me, which I'm part of the conversation on, is related to the rulers and the ruled, the ones ruled, the symbiotic relationship between the two. For a very long time, the human, the general public was needed because they provided a particular service to the ruling elite, specifically the post-colonial world. The post-colonial world existed to service a particular colonial states, right? Now, with the AI coming in, that changes the dynamics. And sorry, let me rephrase it. With the AI integrating in robotics, comes into a whole new world where your need for, if we use the same word, your need for slaves, your need for, the servicing part somehow changes. You don't need coders anymore. You don't need software engineers anymore. You don't need A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now, in that situation, if you start looking at from the ruling elite's perspective, or let me call it the people with power, their concern becomes, okay, why do we actually need the humans anyway? All of these humans that are a burden. Now, these are real conversations that happen in very real world. And if you look at, and I don't want to name any people, but if you look at where the tech is coming in, you look at the founders, just go and look at the backgrounds, just look at the reviews. There are trillion-dollar companies working in defense tech. You look at the CEOs, you look at the reviews, a lot of philosophy majors, they might not share the same view as, the of, by, and for the people. That of, by, and for the people was 1776. Now, the conversation is really something else, which is, if you're building an AI, the society needs to be built around AI. It's not supposed to be built around a human, which is we call technology envelope. We didn't start landing aeroplanes on the highways. We had to build a new infrastructure for the aeroplanes, which was called the airports. When we go to the airport, we are the participant in that infrastructure. That is the place where the air technology lives. We're the participant, we use it. Now, with the AI as well, the new concept is emerging where it is that, the current existing cities, and I work with cities, by the way, in the US for the purpose of AI, the existing cities, the existing social infrastructures do not really allow this existing bulging technology that exists to be penetrated in there. So what do you do? Now, I'll stop at that question on what do you do, because there are very different responses to who you talk to. In the DC, when you talk about AI, it's all China. I've talked to Congress, I've talked to Senate and all. You talk about, AI, and the first response I usually get is, what if President Xi gets it first? And I was like, I'm not sure, what do you mean by that? What if he gets first? He already has it. So, so their concerns are very political, very base level. You talk to people in New York, it's a lot about how does it work in the finance markets. You talk to people in Silicon Valley, it is very different. So, and in the post-colonial states, for instance, when we engage with, we get a lot of, uh, responses, and a lot of reach outs from the dictatorial regimes in our parts of the world. And the only specific thing that they ask is, how can we use AI to rule forever? I mean, this is the concern that is coming out with the dictatorial regimes or anybody that want to be dictator. Can AI help me control the population? So, which is why 2 years back we changed the entire scope of our company to work in democracy tech, because we saw what was coming in. So I think in many of these cases we really need to figure out on on the people involved in AI. So I'm not really scared of AI. I'm scared more about the people who own AI. That's going to be really really tricky part. Sorry for the diversion.
You're unmuted. Do you have thoughts on this?
I muted. I just wanted to like nod audibly as Suzanne was saying, "Oh, like they agree with all of it." Yeah.
Thank you so much. Although we have so many interesting questions in our chat, but unfortunately, we have to cap up the conversation. It was super fun. I think that I could personally talk about this for hours because there's so much to unpack there, and it has been lovely hearing from all of you. It was a wonderful learning experience for me personally, and I'm pretty sure that everyone in the audience and once it's posted as well. There's just so many insights to take from here. Um, and the perspectives was really refreshing, something that's not just like I would read in my daily day-to-day newspapers. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you for the audience for joining us. And thank you, Faisal, Kate, and Hussain for being here today. It means a lot to me and American Pakistan Foundation. And we hope that we continue our roundtables in the future and would love to have you again at some time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.